So, this is my review for the movie Driller Killer, or I guess technically The Driller Killer, which was released in 1979, right? Yes. So, Driller Killer, or The Driller Killer, is a low budget horror film, though the term horror is almost a loose definition, in my opinion. I watched the movie for free through Fossum, which I'm actually starting to really enjoy that website. Uh, but even on their website, the movie was still pretty low quality. Apparently, Driller Killer is actually public domain now, which I guess as of 2006. Of course, I read about it on Wikipedia, and the source for that tagline is an article from '06. So I don't know exactly when Driller Killer became public domain, but as of 2026, it is now. Oh, it's 4:44 a.m. That's funny. Anyway, this movie was directed by Abel Ferreira, and he plays the main character, Reno, though he's not the person that wrote this movie. I do wonder if this movie being public domain might be something to do with it being, low budget or just an early film in Abel Ferreira's career, directing career. Either way, I mean, I think it's cool. I'm glad that it is. I love it when things are public domain that we don't have to wait like 100 years for. So anyway, I thought that the plot to this movie was silly, honestly. I know I say that a lot, but I was like, this is pretty silly to me. A painter in New York City is short on rent, of course. That's always the tagline, right? The plot to stuff like this. And he's, lo- he's late on rent and working on a painting for a buyer. The painter, which is our main character, Reno, asks for an advance from his buyer, but is denied. Apparently, Reno would just keep asking for money and still not deliver. At one point, the buyer was like, "Oh, yeah, I gave you $200 for your girlfriend's abortion, da da da." So I don't know if that was whatever. So, anyway, this seems to be among the things that built tension in Reno's mind for him to eventually snap. Um, Reno lives with two women, Pamela and Carol, who seem to have some sort of semi lesbian relationship, I guess. You see the two of them showering together sensually, like as if it was. I know it's supposed to be like, oh, sexy, yeah, lesbians showering. As a woman, I'm like, y'all act like we just do that. Like, us women just shower naked together. Come on, dude. But this relationship is never talked about, honestly. I don't know if Reno was just living with Pamela or if they were like a threesome. Did Carol have feelings for Pamela or was it more of a companionship thing? This is never talked about. The neighbors to Reno and his roommates are a punk band that seem to play all hours of the day and night, which seems to drive Reno mad. One of the reasons why he goes mad, right? He complains about this to the super at his apartment one day, and the guy tells him that there's nothing he can do. Reno then says if the guy doesn't do anything, then he won't pay rent. The super says, "You don't pay rent anyway." And that made me laugh because it was true. I was like, "Reno, why are you going to what an empty threat that is." That's like saying, "If you don't do this, I'm not going to wash my ass." It's like, "Bitch, you don't use soap anyway." So anyway, the super then shows Reno a skinned rabbit in like a shelf and gives it to him. Reno then takes it back to his apartment and is seen further mutilating it that night. And I know some people will be like, it's just a movie, but honestly, something about that made me feel sad because it was a real rabbit that they used in the film. And I don't know why. I mean, It's decades ago, it's done and over with. But seeing its corpse, that rabbit's corpse desecrated for the movie really bothered me. It really did. I To me, one part of it was like, what a waste of food. You know, the way that the body was like stabbed and all that, the head was stabbed. It was That was actually upsetting to me. Um because I was like, they didn't eat it after that. They didn't cook that fucking shit. They just used it as a prop, and that bothers me. Um, but I also found it weird, just from the movie standpoint. Why the fuck was the rabbit just hanging out in the shelf at the super's place? Why did he just have that there? He just had that. Who has freshly skinned rabbits in New York City? I mean, at least not in the way that that guy did was weird, you know? Anyway, so Reno, probably I think right before this, whatever, but in the movie, Reno sees an ad for a power drill that was only 1995, basically like $20. And we assume that this is the one that he uses later in the film. There's no real like psychotic break for Reno. He just sort of decides to start killing people one night. It's like as if the quote unquote tension builds up. But for me as a viewer, it's not a really justified amount of tension. It's just like, oh, he's short on cash. Oh, the neighbors are annoying. So he decides he's going to start killing people, I guess. I thought it would be a lot more brutal than that, but it really wasn't. So Reno preys on the homeless men of the area, drilling them in the back, forehead, and spine. In fact, the homeless, annoying guy, the guy was like a homeless, annoying drunk at a bus stop, bothering this old guy. And Reno kind of thankfully pops up after the other people go on the bus and the homeless guy stays behind. But Reno like goes up and starts drilling into this guy's spine. And I was like, that part was brutal. I was like, oh my God. Could you imagine that happening to somebody in real life? Jesus. But other than that, though, the way the movie is written, it comes off like as if Reno is taking out his anger on the homeless simply because he can't get any peace and quiet at home. It was like as if he hated the punk band that lived next door to him, yet looking back, Reno never attacks any of the band members. I thought that this was where the movie was going to go, but this never happened, actually. To me, that was what I thought the movie was building up to. I thought that he was going to eventually, like, use the power drill on the singer to the band or one of the guitarists or something because they would always be playing. Once again, that doesn't happen. There was a part of me, though, that really liked seeing the old New York punk scene from this time period. It was a treat, in a way, to see some of the original foundations of heavier music of today getting a spotlight. And I think this was ironically written. I think it was ironically written that the character Reno hated the punk band that lived next to his apartment because the director, Abel Ferrara, would actually go on, apparently from what I read, to include punk themes in his movies after this. And in fact, there was a part of the movie where the character Pamela said that she brought tickets to see Iggy Pop and Dee Dee Ramone. So, though I'm not really into punk rock myself, I do appreciate the genre because it greatly influenced majority of the musicians I listen to today. For example, I'm a huge fan of the band I Hate God, which they have very, very heavy punk influences. Very, very punk influenced. So Reno's girlfriend, Pamela, eventually... Sorry, I had that wrong. Reno's girlfriend, Carol, gets fed up with him and gets in contact with her ex-husband. It's implied that she's thinking of going back to him. Meanwhile, Reno gets a visit from a guy looking for Pamela, who was absent at the time. The guy sees Reno's paintings and asks for his portrait to be made. We never end up seeing the end result to this portrait, but Reno agrees to paint it if the guy agrees to pay $500. So, the same amount of money that they just so happen to need. What's really interesting is that at one point, the guy in the room with Reno starts reading from a book and talking about something called Renove. I was like, this isn't what I was like, this is not what I think it is it? No way. It can't be. I wasn't sure if it was initially, but it turns out that yes, the guy in the movie was reading from the Lesser Key of Solomon, a book about demonology. I was like, what? I guess I thought this must be some sort of Easter egg of some sort. I don't think it was like a foreshadowing clue about what was to come next. I really don't. I wonder why they had that book, of all things, and why it was chosen for him to read that in the movie. Let alone, I mean, how did they end up with it, and why did they read that? I thought that was really, really interesting. Eventually, Reno finishes the painting for his buyer, and when the buyer comes by the apartment, he hates it. And I'm not talking about the second guy, I'm talking about the first guy. So the first guy, who he originally asked for like the $500, the first guy refuses to pay and then leaves. Reno is shocked, and then Carol loses her shit and throws a teapot at the wall. And she screams at Reno to do something, and you start to see the gears moving in his head that he's thinking he has to kill the buyer named Briggs. So Carol ends up leaving Reno, and she goes back to her estranged husband named Steven. Reno tries to stop her, but she walks to the subway anyway. Reno is seen at home later, and he calls Briggs up. He tells him that he has something to show him, and words it in a romantic way. And at first I was like, I'm thinking too hard looking too hard into it. But no. Briggs, it's implied that Briggs thinks that Reno is hitting on him, and they're going to potentially spend the night together. So Briggs tells him it'll be about 45 minutes, and he'd bring a bottle of wine. And I think that this is really interesting because earlier in the film, when Briggs initially denied Reno the $500 advance, Pamela says in another scene, she implies that maybe Reno could have, can I say, fuck it. Pamela implies that Reno can have anal sex with Briggs in order to, get what he wants. But anyway, so Briggs shows up, and Reno eerily appears and kills him, and the screen goes black. Well, the screen goes black while Reno kills him. Pamela then shows up, and she sees something bleeding through the door and opens it to find that it's Briggs. She's horrified, and Reno pops up behind her somehow. It's assumed that he kills her. I didn't understand why he would kill Pamela, because to me she was the most innocent character in the movie. She didn't do anything. She at the most would hang out sometimes with the band next door, but she wasn't like playing the instruments all night. Anyway, we see Carol back with her husband, who is making tea, and she goes in to take a shower. While in the bathroom, Reno shows up in the kitchen and he kills Carol's husband. Somehow, I guess he knew where they lived. Somehow, Carol doesn't hear her husband being killed. She gets out the shower and doesn't notice the dead body on the floor. And she goes to the bedroom, cuts the light off, not realizing that the person in bed isn't her husband. So, of course, Reno is the one in there, but we don't see anything further. It's implied that Carol is none the wiser and is likely to be killed by Reno. Reno is never caught, and the movie ends. I found the movie interesting, but the type I would only watch once, personally. It wasn't that compelling to me, nor scary, but I found it more funny than anything. It was just silly to me how Reno would honestly haphazardly show up with the drill to attack homeless people. In fact, one of the homeless people, even though he was scrounging around looking kind of like Smeagol from Lord of the Rings, I think the last homeless guy that he ended up killing really wasn't doing anything. In fact, that last homeless guy was getting tired of the punk band playing all the time too. Whatever. I know the whole point of the movie is to be, a murder movie. That's the whole plot. But if Reno was strapped for cash, why didn't he just use the drill like as a threatening weapon to rob people? I think that would have made actually a more believable plot. To me, I think the idea would be easier to digest if Reno, for example, had this descent, right, of robbing people first and then he kills them. So think of it like at first he just needed the money. I just need the money to pay rent. But, he like gets the money, but eventually he tries to rob someone and like they refuse. And so he has to kill them. That I think would make more sense for this movie. But I do realize I'm the type of person, I prefer the plots to the movies I watch to be believable. Now I know in like literature and even in film too, there's the concept of suspending your disbelief. And I tried to apply that, to this film. I tried. But I had a hard time trying to suspend my disbelief for this movie. Going through the newspaper archives, there weren't really any reviews for the movie that I could find. Once again, whenever I try to find reviews in the newspapers, I really only look within the first year or two, because certain time periods like the 70s, 80s, and stuff like that, a lot of things, they would come into the public consciousness and then quickly fade away. So it's unlikely that there's a newspaper review for Driller Killer like 30 years later, Anyway, in the newspaper, I emphasize. But I know that it's a really low budget film, so I didn't really expect many people to have written about it, it probably didn't have many people that watched it and wrote about it. I did see a lot of ads showing that the movie was in theaters, but not much beyond that. Funny enough, this movie had another ad, just like Satan's Children, that claimed, "You haven't seen anything like this since Texas Chainsaw Massacre." Just like Satan's Children, they tried to piggyback off of the actual fright that the Chainsaw Massacre, induces, but this falls completely short of the horror that Texas Chainsaw Massacre brings. There wasn't a single time while watching Driller Killer that I actually felt any sort of nervous tension. Nothing in Driller Killer compares to that scene in Texas Chainsaw Massacre where Leatherface beats that dude over the head with the hammer that very first time. That is something like you cannot compare with that scene to me. Nothing in this movie compares with that scene alone. So that's where I say you cannot compete where you don't compare, right? So I found the character Reno to be pretentious and rather annoying, which in a way makes sense, though, that a freak like him would end up being a serial killer, albeit a bad one. There was a part to his character that honestly reminded me of the person Douglas Levison, the man who was infamous from that video trumpet fight. Granted, I know that these two instances are decades apart in time, but if I can, I'm going to play a clip. Hopefully YouTube won't fuck me over by doing this. But this is what I thought of. There's this one scene where, what's his face? Reno is being a douchebag to Carol, saying like, you don't know anything about painting and art, yada yada yada. And if I can, I'll play that clip and I'll show you what I mean by him reminding me of Douglas Levison.
It's finished. I mean, you know we need the money, so why don't you face up to it?
Oh, so it's finished. Thank you. It's finished. Since when did you become such an expert on painting? I mean, you're telling me it's finished? Well, what do you know about painting anyway? Really? What do you know about painting? Tell you what you know about painting, man. You don't know nothing about painting, man. You know what you know about? You know about how to bitch, and how to eat, and how to bitch, and how to shit, and how to bitch, but you don't know nothing about painting. So don't tell me when this is going to be done. I'll tell you when it's going to be done. And about the money, man, I don't want to hear about that money. All right? 'Cause that's all you talk about. That's all the other one talks about. That's all I hear from that fag art dealer uptown. And I don't want to hear it because the sound of that word, man, drives me crazy. And you know what I think about money anyway? I'll tell you what I think about money. See this? This is what I think about money. This. All right? So go ahead now. You ready? Throw it up in my face. Come on, you've been waiting to say it. Say it. Say it. Say it how you've been paying the bills. How we've been spending your money. How you picked up the rent last month. Huh? What do you want me to do? Get on my knees? You want me to kiss your feet? But forget it, man, because this place has been here long before you got here, and it's going to be here long after you leave, all right?
You any kind of artist? Anybody know who you are? Maybe everybody else wants to enjoy the peace and quiet. This is one of the most important places in all of North America. Who are you? Who are you? You miserable, presumptuous, no talent. You're no artist. An artist respects the silence that serves as the foundation of creativity. You obviously don't have the talent. You don't have enough respect for yourself or other people, or what it is to express yourself. In music or any other form of creativity. And I'm an NYU film school graduate, sucker, and the School of Visual Arts, and the Academy of Art University in San Francisco. You suck. You're a no talent. If you really had talent, go practice, and then get yourself a gig, instead of ruining the end of the day for everybody down here. You disgrace. You're everything that's gone wrong in this world. You're a self-consumed, no talent, mediocre piece of shit. And I've earned my right to say it. Okay? I had 200,000 people with Bill Graham. In 1975, I walked Bob Dylan up on stage. Who the fuck are you? I knew the Grateful Dead from 1966. Who the fuck are you? You nothing. You nothing.
Overall, I would not recommend Driller Killer. It's not necessary to watch, in my personal opinion. Not to a general movie fan. I don't think just the average movie person would really... an average person probably wouldn't care for this movie, I don't think. But, I mean, if you like horror or trash, and there's a lot of people that like trash, myself included, I think this movie is okay to watch once. You know, you could watch it once, look at this piece of trash, and then move on. I cannot see myself watching this again on purpose. I refuse to watch this again. It's not worth the time. It's just stupid. But I do find it interesting, though, that this movie did have an influence on different parts of pop culture. I forgot to write this down, but apparently this movie did, or very, very likely inspired Puppet Combo and their game, Power Drill Massacre, if that's what it's called, which makes a lot of sense because there's also some other Puppet Combo games that have similar titles to other horror movies, which maybe in the future I'll watch some of those movies too. But other than that, I would say I give Driller Killer one slime. One slime. One. Driller Killer or Driller Killer. Driller Killer. I remember in September when I gave my cat some tender centers and I watched Driller Killer. Anyway, that's the review. Hope you enjoyed it.